The lamplight from the barn cast long shadows across the frozen ground as Kane Rutherford made his final rounds on that bitter January evening in 1878, his breath forming clouds in the frigid Wyoming air. And when he pulled open the heavy barn door expecting to find only his horses settled in for the night, he discovered instead a slender figure curled deep within his haystack, dark hair spilling across the golden straw like ink on parchment. He stood motionless for a moment, his hand still gripping the door handle, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. She was young, maybe 20 or so, with dirt smudged across her cheekbone and her clothes travel worn and thin against the winter cold. His first instinct was to wake her immediately, demand to know what she was doing trespassing on his property, but something in her face stopped him. Even in sleep, she looked exhausted beyond measure, her features drawn with a weariness that spoke of hard miles and harder circumstances. Kane cleared his throat, not loudly but enough to stir her from sleep. Her eyes flew open, wide and startled, the color of amber catching the lamplight. She scrambled backward into the hay, her hand reaching for something at her waist that was not there, and he saw the moment panic gave way to resignation. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and calm, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I am not going to hurt you." She stared at him, breathing hard, taking in his tall frame, the worn leather of his coat, the revolver at his hip that he made no move toward. Her gaze flickered to the open door behind him, calculating distances, weighing options. "I am sorry," she said finally, her voice rough from sleep and cold. "I will leave. I just needed somewhere warm for the night. I did not think anyone would mind the haystack." "Haystack is not the warmest place on a night like this," Kane said, studying her more closely now. She was shivering, he realized, though trying hard not to show it. "Barn is warmer. Come inside." She blinked at him, confusion crossing her features. "Inside the barn. I am in the barn." "Inside the house," he clarified, jerking his head toward the building visible through the barn door, its windows glowing with warmth. "You will freeze out here. Wyoming winters do not show mercy to anyone." Suspicion narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "Do not know you," he agreed. "But I know cold and I know what it does to people. You can stay the night, get warm, get some food. Come morning, you can tell me your story and we will figure out what comes next." She hesitated, and he could see the war playing out across her face. Trust warred with desperation, caution with the bone-deep need for warmth and safety. Finally, slowly, she pushed herself up out of the hay, brushing straw from her skirts. Up close, he could see she was even younger than he had first thought, with fine features and intelligent eyes that had seen too much too soon. "My name is Jane," she said quietly. "Jane Morrison, Kane Rutherford." He stepped back, giving her space to move past him. "Come on then, before we both turn to ice standing here." She followed him across the yard, keeping a careful distance, her arms wrapped around herself against the wind that howled down from the mountains. The ranch house was modest but well built, solid timber and good craftsmanship evident in every line. Kane pushed open the door and warmth rushed out to meet them, the heat from the potbelly stove in the corner almost overwhelming after the bitter cold outside. Jane stopped just inside the threshold, her eyes adjusting to the light, taking in the single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space all at once. It was neat, almost spare but comfortable in its simplicity. A table with 2 chairs, a bed in the far corner, shelves lined with books and supplies, and that blessed stove radiating heat like a small sun. "Sit," Kane said, pulling one of the chairs closer to the stove. "I will get coffee going and find you something to eat." She sank into the chair gratefully, holding her hands out toward the warmth. He could see them shaking now that she had stopped trying to hide it. While the coffee pot heated, he pulled together cold beef, bread, and the last of the apple preserves his neighbor had given him at Christmas. It was simple fare, but her eyes widened when he set the plate in front of her. "Thank you," she whispered, and he heard genuine emotion beneath the words. He poured 2 cups of coffee and settled into the other chair, watching as she ate. She tried to maintain some semblance of manners, but hunger won out and she finished the food quickly, color gradually returning to her pale cheeks. "How long since you ate properly?" he asked. 2 days, she admitted, wrapping her hands around the coffee cup. "Maybe 3, I lost track." "You running from something?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Someone. My stepfather. He wanted to marry me off to a man 3 times my age, a business associate of his who needed a young wife. I refused. He said I had no choice, so I left." "Where from?" "Cheyenne. I have been traveling for 5 days trying to get as far north as I could. I thought maybe I could reach Montana, find work somewhere, start over." She laughed bitterly. "Foolish, I suppose. A woman alone with no money and no prospects." Kane was silent for a moment, thinking. Cheyenne was over 100 miles south of Sheridan. That she had made it this far in the dead of winter with nothing spoke to either remarkable luck or remarkable stubbornness. Probably both. "What kind of work were you thinking to find? Anything honest?" "I can cook, clean, so. I can read and write and do figures. My mother insisted on education before she died." Her voice softened on those last words. "I thought perhaps a boarding house or hotel might need help, or a family needing a governess." "Sheridan is not a big town," Kane said slowly, "but it is growing. The railroad came through 2 years back, brought more people. There are a few hotels, some businesses. Come morning, I can take you into town, introduce you around. My word carries some weight, might help you find something." She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face. "Why are you helping me? You could have sent me on my way, or worse. Most men would not show such kindness to a stranger." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "My mother taught me to treat people right. She died when I was 15, but her lessons stuck. Besides, I know what it is to be alone and desperate. I came out here 7 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination. Built this place from scratch. I remember what it felt like, not knowing if I would make it." "You did well for yourself," Jane said, glancing around the tidy room again. "This is a good home." "It is enough for me. Got about 300 acres, 20 head of cattle, good horses. I sell to the Army fort when they need mounts, do some work breaking horses for other ranchers. It is a living." They talked through another cup of coffee, the conversation flowing easier now. She told him about her mother, a gentle woman who had died of fever 3 years ago, leaving Jane alone with a stepfather who saw her as nothing more than a commodity to be traded for business advantage. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the restlessness that had driven him west after his parents died, the years of hard work that had gone into building something of his own. When he noticed her eyes growing heavy, he stood and pulled blankets from a chest, making up a bed on the floor near the stove. "You take the bed," he said when she started to protest. "I have slept on worse than a good floor. You need the rest more than I do." She was too tired to argue much. He turned his back while she settled into the bed, giving her what privacy he could in the single room. When he lay down on his makeshift pallet, he could hear her breathing, already evening out into sleep. Kane stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the stove. He had told her the truth about helping people, about the lessons his mother had taught him. But there was something else, something he had not mentioned. When she had looked at him with those amber eyes, exhausted and wary and determined all at once, he had felt something shift in his chest. It was too soon to name it, too foolish to even consider, but it was there nonetheless. Come morning, he would help her find work in Sheridan. It was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. And if some part of him hoped she would stay close, well, that was something he would examine later. The wind rattled the windows, but inside the house was warm and safe, and for the first time in days Jane Morrison slept without fear. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Bighorn Mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Kane woke early from habit, stoking the fire and putting coffee on before Jane stirred. She emerged from sleep slowly, blinking in confusion at her surroundings before memory returned. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice quiet. "Coffee is almost ready. I will make breakfast and then we can head into town if you are up for it." She sat up, pushing her dark hair back from her face. "I should help. You have already done so much. You know your way around a kitchen. Better than most things." There was a hint of a smile on her lips, the first he had seen from her. They worked together preparing breakfast, moving around the small space with surprising ease. She found the eggs and bacon without needing to ask, located the skillets and plates as if she had some instinct for where things should be. He watched her from the corner of his eye as he sliced bread, noting the competent way she handled herself, the quiet efficiency of her movements. Over breakfast, they made plans. He would take her into Sheridan, introduce her to Martha Hendricks, who ran the boarding house, and to Samuel Chen, who owned the largest general store. Both were good people who might know of positions available. He had a few other contacts, business associates who might need help. "I cannot pay you back right now," Jane said as they cleared the dishes, "but I will. Once I have work and wages, I will repay your kindness." "Not necessary." "It is to me." There was steel in her voice, pride that he recognized and respected. They hitched up his wagon for the journey into town, Jane bundled in a spare coat he insisted she take. The road was rutted and frozen, the 7 miles to Sheridan passing slowly as the wagon jolted over uneven ground. They talked more as they traveled, filling in the details of their lives. He learned that her mother had been a schoolteacher from Boston, who had come west after marrying Jane's father, a surveyor who had died when Jane was just 5. The stepfather had seemed kind at first, but his true nature revealed itself after the marriage was secure. "I should have seen it sooner," Jane said, staring out at the passing landscape. "The way he looked at my mother's jewelry, her savings." He went through everything within a year of their marriage. By the time she died, there was almost nothing left. And then he started talking about his business associate, about what a good match it would be. "You did the right thing leaving." "I hope so. Some days I wonder if I was just being stubborn, if I should have accepted the life he planned for me. At least I would have been safe." "Safe is not the same as free," Kane said. "And marriage to a man you do not choose, do not care for, that is a kind of prison no matter how comfortable the cage." She looked at him then, something like understanding passing between them. "You never married, never found the right woman. Came close once back in Missouri. She decided she did not want a life on the frontier, wanted me to stay and work her father's farm. I could not do it. Needed something of my own, I suppose. She married someone else within the year." "Do you regret it?" He considered the question seriously. "No, it would not have worked. We wanted different things. Better to know that early than spend a lifetime resenting each other." Sheridan emerged from the winter landscape like a promise, wood and brick buildings lining the main street, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys. It was not a large town, maybe 800 people, but it was growing steadily. The railroad had brought opportunity, and with it came merchants, families, workers looking to build new lives in the Wyoming territory. Kane drove the wagon down Main Street, nodding to people he knew, aware of the curious glances directed at Jane beside him. News would spread quickly that Kane Rutherford had come to town with a young woman, but he did not care. Let them talk. By the end of the day, she would have her own reputation, her own place in the community. Their first stop was the boarding house, a two-story building painted white with green shutters. Martha Hendricks answered the door herself, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a shrewd but not unkind expression. "Kane Rutherford, what brings you to town so early?" She looked past him to Jane waiting in the wagon. "And with company, I see." "Morning, Martha. I have a favor to ask. This is Miss Jane Morrison. She is new to Sheridan, looking for honest work. I thought you might know of opportunities or perhaps need help yourself." Martha studied Jane as she approached, taking in the worn clothes and the proud set of her shoulders. "Come inside where it is warm. Let me get a proper look at you." Inside the boarding house, the rooms were neat and well maintained, the smell of bread baking drifting from the kitchen. Martha sat them down in the parlor and brought coffee while she peppered Jane with questions. Where was she from? What were her skills? Why had she come to Sheridan? Jane answered honestly, editing only the most personal details of her circumstances. She had left Cheyenne seeking a fresh start, had experience with housekeeping and cooking, could read and write and keep accounts. "I run a respectable house," Martha said finally. 8 rooms, usually full with railroad workers and traveling salesmen. "My girl Annie quit last month to get married, and I have been managing alone since. It is hard work, long hours. Washing, cooking, cleaning, making sure the guests behave themselves. Room and board included, plus $2 a week. You interested?" Jane's eyes widened. Yes, absolutely." "Then you start tomorrow. Be here at 6 in the morning. I will show you the rooms and the routines." Martha turned to Kane. "You vouch for her?" "I do." "Good enough for me. I trust your judgment, Kane." She stood, signaling the interview was over. "Miss Morrison, I will see you tomorrow morning. Do not be late." Outside, Jane was nearly trembling with relief and excitement. "I have a job. I actually have a job. Told you we would find you something." Kane felt an absurd rush of pleasure at her happiness. "Martha is tough but fair. You will do well with her." "I need to thank you properly. I do not even know how to begin." "Thank me by making a good life here. That is all I need." They made a few more stops in town, Kane introducing her to the storekeeper Samuel Chen, the doctor, the minister at the church. By the time they finished, Jane had been thoroughly integrated into the community, her story known and largely sympathetic. Small towns could be cruel to outsiders, but they could also be remarkably welcoming when someone like Kane made introductions. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both of them lost in thought. The sun was high now, glinting off the snow, and the day had grown marginally warmer, though still well below freezing. "You will stay another night," Kane said as they approached his property. "Get a proper rest before you start work tomorrow. I will bring you back to town in the morning. You have done so much already. One more night is nothing. Besides, I am making stew for dinner, and it is always better with company." She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her whole face, and Kane felt that shift in his chest again, stronger this time. They spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship. He tended to his horses while she insisted on helping, proving she knew her way around a barn better than he had expected. Her father, the surveyor, had kept horses, she explained, and she had loved caring for them as a child. "This one is beautiful," she said, running her hand along the neck of his best mare, a chestnut with white socks and an intelligent eye. "What is her name?" "Patience. She earned it. Took me 3 months to break her, and she fought me every step of the way. But once we came to an understanding, she turned out to be the best horse I have ever owned." Sometimes the things worth having are the ones that do not come easy. Jane spoke absently, focused on the horse, but Kane heard the deeper meaning beneath her words. Inside, he taught her how to make his mother's stew recipe, the one he still made when he wanted comfort on cold nights. They chopped vegetables together, browned the beef, added spices and stock and let it simmer while the house filled with rich, savory smells. "Your mother must have been a wonderful cook," Jane said, tasting the broth and nodding approval. "She was wonderful at everything, cooking, gardening, making a house feel like home. She could stretch $1 further than anyone I ever knew, and she never complained, never made my father feel bad about the lean times. She just made it work. She sounds remarkable. You were lucky to have her, even for the time you did." They ate as the sun set, the windows darkening while the lamp on the table cast a warm, golden glow. Conversation flowed easily between them now, the initial wariness gone. She told him about books she had read, her love of poetry and history. He talked about the land, the way it changed with the seasons, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. "I never thought I would like it out here," Jane admitted. "The frontier always seemed so harsh, so unforgiving, but there is beauty too, is not there? In the mountains, the sky, the way everything feels so big and possible." "That is exactly it," Kane said, leaning forward. "That is why I stayed. Back east, everything felt decided already, like my whole life was mapped out and all I had to do was follow the path laid down by everyone who came before. Out here, you can make your own path." "I want that," she said softly. "My own path, my own choices." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Kane felt it like a physical thing, a pull toward this woman who had stumbled into his life just 24 hours ago. It was too soon, too fast, but undeniable nonetheless. He cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "I should clean up. You have a big day tomorrow." They washed the dishes together, working in a silence that was comfortable rather than awkward. When everything was put away and the stove banked for the night, he made up his pallet on the floor again while she took the bed. "Kane." Her voice came soft through the darkness after he had settled down. "Yes, thank you, for everything. You saved my life, I think, or at least gave me a chance to save myself. Sleep well, Jane. You too." He lay awake for a long time, listening to her breathing even out, thinking about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday, his biggest concern had been whether the cattle would make it through the winter. Now he was lying awake thinking about a woman with amber eyes and a determination that matched his own. Whatever happened next, he knew his life had changed the moment he opened that barn door. Morning came too quickly. Kane rose early and made breakfast while Jane packed the few belongings she had carried from Cheyenne. The ride into town was bittersweet, both of them aware that something was ending even as something else began. He pulled the wagon up in front of the boarding house just as Martha Hendricks opened the front door, ready to begin the day. "Right on time," Martha said approvingly. "Come on in, girl. We have a lot to cover." Jane climbed down from the wagon, smoothing her skirts. She turned to Kane, and he saw 100 things in her expression that she did not say aloud. "Thank you," she said finally, the simple words carrying more weight than any speech. "You know where to find me if you need anything. The ranch is 7 miles south, just off the main road. Anyone in town can give you directions." "I will remember." He wanted to say more, wanted to ask when he might see her again, but Martha was waiting and the moment was already stretching too long. Instead, he just nodded, tipped his hat and drove away, feeling her eyes on him until he turned the corner onto Main Street. The ranch felt empty when he returned. It was ridiculous, he told himself. She had only been there 2 nights. The place had felt just fine before she arrived. but he could not shake the sense that something vital was missing, that the house had briefly come alive and was now settling back into stillness. He threw himself into work, mending fences, tending the cattle, breaking a young gelding that needed training. The days developed a rhythm, but every time he went into town for supplies or business, he found himself looking for Jane, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He saw her 3 days later, emerging from the general store with a basket over her arm, her cheeks pink from the cold. She spotted him at the same moment, and her face lit up in a way that made his heart stutter. "Kane, I was hoping to run into you, Jane." "How is the work going?" "Exhausting," she admitted, "but good. Martha is teaching me so much. I never realized how much went into running a boarding house. It is like conducting an orchestra, making sure everything happens at the right time. You look well, settled. I feel it. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe." She paused, then added, "I have been wanting to thank you properly. Would you let me cook you dinner? Martha says I can use the boarding house kitchen in the evenings when the guests are done eating. It is not much, but it is something. You do not need to repay me. I know, but I want to, please." How could he refuse when she looked at him like that? "When?" "Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. I will be there." He spent the next day in a state of anticipation that annoyed him with its intensity. He was a grown man, not some boy getting worked up over dinner. But he found himself washing more carefully than usual, putting on his best shirt, making sure his boots were cleaned of mud. The boarding house dining room was empty when he arrived, the guests either still working or already departed for the evening. Jane had set one end of the long table with care, 2 places laid with Martha's good dishes, candles burning despite the early hour. "You went to a lot of trouble," he said, taking in the scene. "I wanted it to be nice. Sit, please. Everything is ready." She had made roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, biscuits that were fluffy and golden, and a dried apple pie for dessert. It was simple food but prepared with obvious care, and it was delicious. "You are a fine cook," he said after the first few bites. "My mother's recipes. She wrote them all down in a book before she died. It is one of the few things I managed to take with me when I left." She touched her pocket, and he understood the book was there, carried close. They talked through the meal, catching up on the days since they had last seen each other. She told him about the guests at the boarding house, the quirks and habits she was learning, the way Martha could size up a person in seconds and know exactly how to manage them. He told her about the gelding he was training, the letters he had received from the fort about potentially buying more horses in the spring. "You should come out to the ranch sometime," he said, surprising himself with the boldness. "See the horses. You seem to like patience." "I would love that." "When?" "Sunday. I could come get you after church if you are free." "I am free." Her smile was warm and genuine, and he felt that pull toward her again, stronger each time. Sunday seemed a lifetime away, but it finally arrived. Kane sat through the church service barely hearing a word, his attention focused on Jane in the row ahead of him, her dark hair pinned up beneath a simple hat. When the service ended, he made his way to her side, nodding politely to Martha, who was watching with sharp, knowing eyes. The ride out to the ranch was pleasant, the weather having turned milder, the worst of the winter cold easing into something almost bearable. Jane exclaimed over the landscape, pointing out the mountains, a hawk circling overhead, the way the light played across the snow-covered fields. At the ranch, he showed her everything. The barn with its neat stalls, the horses that came eagerly to the fence when they heard his voice, the cattle scattered across the winter pasture. She asked intelligent questions, demonstrating a genuine interest that pleased him more than he wanted to examine too closely. "It is wonderful," she said as they stood looking out over his land. "You built all this yourself. with help when I needed it. Neighbors pitched in on the barn raising, and I have hired hands during roundup. But mostly, yes, it is mine. You should be proud. It is a real accomplishment. They spent the afternoon together, falling into an easy pattern of conversation and comfortable silence. He taught her how to properly saddle patience, and they rode out across his land, Jane laughing with delight at the freedom of it, the wind in her hair and the powerful animal beneath her. When evening came, they made dinner together again, moving around his small kitchen with the same natural rhythm they had found before. It felt right, having her there. It felt like something he could get used to very easily. "I should take you back," he said reluctantly as the sky darkened. "Martha will worry if you are too late. I know, but I wish I could stay longer." She spoke without thinking, then blushed at her own forwardness. "I mean, it is so peaceful out here, different from town. You are welcome anytime, I mean that." The ride back to Sheridan was quiet, both of them aware that something was building between them, something neither was quite ready to name but could no longer ignore. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Kane found reasons to come to town more often than strictly necessary, and Jane found ways to be visible when he did. They shared meals when they could, conversations on the boarding house porch, walks through town that set the gossips talking. Martha pulled Jane aside one evening after Kane had left from another dinner. "That man is courting you, you know. We are just friends." "Friends, my eye. I have seen the way he looks at you and the way you look right back. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I do not know," Jane admitted. "Everything happened so fast. A month ago I was running for my life. Now I have a job, a place to live, a man who looks at me like I am the only person in the world. It does not seem real enough. Kane Rutherford is one of the good ones, Jane. Honest, hardworking, decent to his core. If he cares for you, and I believe he does, you could do a lot worse. What if I ruin it? What if I am not ready? What if he realizes I am not what he thinks I am?" Martha laughed, not unkindly. "That is just fear talking. We all feel that way when something good comes along. The trick is not letting the fear win." Jane thought about Martha's words over the next few days. Fear had driven so much of her life lately. Fear of her stepfather, fear of the future, fear of ending up trapped in a life she did not choose. But Kane did not feel like a trap. He felt like a door opening, like possibility. On a cold February morning, Kane arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual, his expression troubled. "Can we talk?" They walked to the edge of town, finding privacy near the railroad depot. "What is wrong?" Jane asked, worry tightening her chest. "Nothing is wrong exactly, but I need to tell you something, and I do not know how you will take it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have been thinking about you since the day I found you in my barn, every day, all the time. When I am working, when I am trying to sleep, you are there in my head. And I know it has only been a few weeks, I know it is probably too soon, but I have to tell you, I care about you, Jane, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time, maybe ever." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Kane, let me finish. I'm not asking you for anything you are not ready to give. I just need you to know where I stand, how I feel. If you need time, I will wait. If you do not feel the same way, I will accept that. But I could not keep pretending we are just friends when what I want is so much more." She looked at him, this good man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who looked at her like she was precious, who made her feel safe and valued and seen. Fear still whispered in the back of her mind, but Martha's words were louder. "I feel the same way," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too much, or that I was fooling myself. But I think about you all the time, too. I think about your ranch and the way you smile when you are with your horses and how kind you are even when you are trying to be tough. I care about you too, Kane, so much it scares me." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, warming everything it touched. "You mean it." "I mean it." He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm around hers. "Then we will figure this out together. No rushing, no pressure. We will take the time we need and do this right." "Together," she agreed, and the word felt like a promise. Their courtship became the talk of Sheridan, though mostly in approving tones. Kane was well liked, and Jane had quickly earned respect with her hard work and pleasant manner. People smiled when they saw the couple together, nodded knowingly when Kane helped her into his wagon, whispered about when there might be a wedding. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, the snow melting in fits and starts, muddy tracks appearing on the roads before another storm would cover everything white again. But gradually, inevitably, the land began to wake. Green shoots appeared in sheltered spots, the cattle grew restless, and the air carried the promise of warmth to come. Kane proposed on a Sunday in late March, taking Jane out to the ranch as had become their custom. But this time, he brought her to a spot on a ridge overlooking his land, the Bighorn Mountains rising in the distance, the sky impossibly blue overhead. "I know we have not been courting long," he said, his hand holding hers as they stood together looking out over the view. "But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are what has been missing, Jane. You make everything better, clearer, more complete. I love you. I want to build a life with you, right here on this land. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and go to sleep every night knowing you are there. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes, Kane, I will marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band set with a small garnet. "It was my mother's. I have been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. It is perfect." She watched as he slipped it onto her finger, the metal warm from being held close to his heart. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools, joy bubbling up between them. The wedding was planned for May, giving them time to prepare and for the weather to fully turn. Jane continued working at the boarding house, saving every penny she could, while Kane began preparing the ranch house for a wife. He built additional furniture, expanded the garden plot, made repairs and improvements he had been putting off. Martha threw Jane a small party with the other women in town, presenting her with quilts and preserves and practical gifts for her new home. The church ladies, initially reserved about the quick courtship, had warmed to Jane over the winter months and now welcomed her fully into the community. "You are one of us now," Martha said, hugging Jane tight. "Sheridan takes care of its own." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt like a blessing. The ceremony was held in the church, the small building packed with what seemed like the entire town. Jane wore a dress that Martha and the other women had helped her sew, simple but lovely, with her mother's silver locket at her throat. Kane stood at the front of the church in his Sunday best, his eyes locked on Jane as she walked down the aisle. She had never seen him look more handsome or more happy, and her own heart felt so full she thought it might burst. The minister kept the ceremony brief, the words familiar but made new by the weight of meaning behind them. When Kane slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, his hands were steady, his voice firm as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of their lives. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said with a smile, and Kane did thoroughly to the delight of the congregation. The reception was held at the boarding house, Martha having insisted on hosting. There was food and music, dancing and toasts, laughter ringing through the rooms. Jane danced first with her husband, the word still strange and wonderful in her mind, and then with half the men in town while Kane spun the ladies around the floor. As the sun began to set, they slipped away, climbing into Kane's wagon decorated with ribbons and tin cans by helpful friends. The ride out to the ranch felt different now, weighted with anticipation and promise. Inside the house, Kane had lit lamps and laid a fire in the stove despite the mild evening. "Welcome home, Mrs. Rutherford," he said, lifting her over the threshold as tradition demanded. "I like the sound of that," she said, her arms around his neck. Mrs. Rutherford. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other made sweeter by the depth of feeling between them. Kane was patient and gentle, making sure Jane felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two pieces finding their perfect fit. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Jane felt a peace she had never known before. This was home. This was where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Kane asked, his fingers running through her hair. "That I am happy. That I never thought I could be this happy. When I was running from Cheyenne, half frozen and terrified, I could not imagine a future that did not involve just surviving. But it is so much more than survival. It is life, real life." He tightened his arms around her. "I know what you mean. I thought I was content before, thought I had everything I needed. But I was just going through the motions. You make everything mean something more." They talked long into the night, making plans for the future, sharing dreams and hopes. They would expand the cattle herd, maybe add some sheep. Jane wanted a big garden, chickens for eggs, a milk cow. They both wanted children eventually when the time was right. "Not too many," Jane said with a laugh. "Maybe 3 or 4. "We will see what the Lord provides," Kane said, "but I hope they all have your eyes. And your stubbornness." "That is your stubbornness, Mrs. Rutherford. I am merely determined." She swatted his chest playfully, and he caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss, before finally falling asleep tangled together as the moon rose over the mountains. Life settled into a rhythm over the following months. Jane threw herself into making the house a home, planting the garden, sewing curtains, organizing and rearranging until everything felt right. Kane taught her more about horses and cattle, pleased when she proved to have a natural talent for both. They worked side by side through the long summer days, planting and tending, mending fences, moving cattle to fresh grazing. It was hard work, but satisfying, the kind of labor that left them tired but content at the end of each day. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Kane had built, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they read aloud to each other from Kane's collection of books, or Jane would teach him the poems she loved. Other times they just sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, grateful for the peace and the company. By late summer, Jane knew she was pregnant. She told Kane on a warm August evening, nervous despite knowing he wanted children. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, joy and wonder and fierce protectiveness all at once. "You are sure?" he asked, his hand already moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "As sure as I can be. I think the baby will come in March, maybe early April." He kissed her then, sweet and reverent. "We are going to have a baby, our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the morning sickness in the early months was miserable. Kane hovered and fretted until Jane had to shoo him away, insisting she was fine, that this was normal. But his concern was touching, evidence of how much he cared. As fall turned to winter, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Kane built a beautiful cradle from oak, sanding it smooth and carving a simple pattern along the edges. Jane sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her hands working even as her belly grew round with their child. The women of Sheridan rallied around her, offering advice and practical help. Martha visited often, bringing supplies and sharing stories from her own children's births years ago. The doctor stopped by to check on her progress, pronouncing her and the baby healthy. When the first pains came on a snowy March morning, Kane sent for the doctor and Martha, then paced the floor while the women took over the bedroom. It was a long labor, lasting through the day and into the night, but finally, just after midnight, a baby's cry filled the house. "You have a son," Martha announced, emerging from the bedroom with a broad smile. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing just fine." Kane rushed past her to find Jane propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, their son in her arms. The baby was red-faced and squalling, tiny fists waving, dark hair plastered to his head. "He is perfect," Kane breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You are perfect." "God, Jane, I was so scared." "I know, I could hear you pacing out there," she smiled tiredly. "Meet your son, Kane, meet Kieran. Kane Rutherford," Kane said, trying out the name. "Hello, Kieran. Welcome to the world, little man." He held his son for the first time, marveling at how small and fragile the baby felt, how perfectly formed every finger and toe. Kieran quieted in his father's arms, dark eyes blinking open, and Kane felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. The days that followed were a blur of feedings and diaper changes, sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Kane discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor with a fussy baby at 3 in the morning, changing soiled clothes without complaint, supporting Jane as she navigated the challenges of new motherhood. "I could not do this without you," she told him one night as they both sat up with Kieran, trying to soothe him through a bout of colic. "You could. You are the strongest person I know, but you do not have to. We are a team, remember?" Kieran grew from a wrinkled newborn into a beautiful baby, his dark hair giving way to lighter brown, his eyes settling into a shade between his mother's amber and his father's hazel. He was an easy baby overall, quick to smile, curious about everything. By the time summer arrived, life had settled into a new normal. Jane carried Kieran in a sling while she worked in the garden, and Kane built a shaded play area where the baby could lie on a blanket and watch the clouds drift by. The ranch prospered, the cattle herd growing, the horse business thriving as word spread about Kane's skill as a trainer. On their second anniversary, Kane surprised Jane with a gift. "I know we said we were saving money," he said, handing her a wrapped package. "But I saw this in town and I had to get it for you." Inside was a leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. "For your poems and stories," Kane explained. "You are always talking about things you want to write down, and I thought maybe it was time you started." She threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you. It is wonderful." That night, after Kieran was asleep, she made the first entry in the journal, writing about how her life had changed since that cold January night when she had fallen asleep in a stranger's haystack. She wrote about fear and hope, about the kindness of a cowboy who had offered warmth and shelter, about falling in love and building a life in the wild Wyoming territory. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. A daughter, Catherine, was born 2 years after Kieran, her arrival easier than her brother's, her temperament sunny and sweet. Another son, Kevin, came 3 years later, completing their family in a chaos of laughter and noise and unconditional love. The ranch grew as their family grew. They added more land, more cattle, hired hands to help with the work. Kane's reputation as a horseman spread throughout the territory, and buyers came from as far as Colorado to purchase his stock. Jane became a pillar of the Sheridan community, teaching Sunday school at the church, helping organize town events, welcoming newcomers the way she had been welcomed. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure no one who came through Sheridan ever felt that way if she could help it. There were hard times, too. A winter when they lost half the herd to disease, Kane's despair at the financial loss only eased by Jane's steady faith that they would recover. A spring when little Catherine nearly died from scarlet fever, the whole family holding vigil by her bedside until the fever finally broke. The ordinary struggles of making a life on the frontier, of raising children, of maintaining a marriage through stress and exhaustion. But through it all, the foundation held. Kane and Jane, partners in every sense, facing each challenge together. Their love deepened and matured, growing from the passionate intensity of those early days into something richer and more resilient. On a warm evening in June 1895, 17 years after Jane had first slept in Kane's haystack, they sat together on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Kieran was 15 now, tall and lanky, already helping his father with the serious work of running the ranch. Catherine at 13 was in that awkward stage between child and woman, all long limbs and self-consciousness. Kevin at 10 was pure mischief, always into something, always making them laugh. "Remember when it was just us?" Kane asked, his arm around Jane's shoulders. "Barely. Feels like we have always had this noisy crew." She leaned into him, comfortable and content. "Do you miss the quiet?" "Not for a second, though I would not mind a little time alone with my wife now and then." She laughed. "Martha offered to take them all for a weekend next month. Said we looked like we could use a break. Martha is a wise woman. We should take her up on that." They watched Kieran chase his younger siblings around the yard, his patience with them evident even as he pretended to be a fearsome monster. "He is going to be a good man," Jane said softly. "Like his father. He had a good example in his mother. They all did." The children called for them to come play, and with a shared smile, Kane and Jane stood and joined them, running and laughing in the golden evening light. Later, much later, after the children were finally settled in bed and the house was quiet, Kane and Jane lay together in their room, the window open to let in the cool night air. "Are you happy?" Kane asked, as he sometimes did, needing to hear the answer. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Jane said, as she always did, meaning it more each time. "You saved my life that night, you know, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was just going through the motions before you. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something beyond just survival. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come to the barn that night, if I had just moved on the next morning, all the time? And every time I think about it, I thank God I went out there when I did. Thank God you were desperate enough to sleep in a haystack in the middle of winter. Thank God for every small decision that brought us to this exact place." She turned in his arms to face him, her hand cupping his cheek. The face she loved, older now, weathered by sun and wind, but still the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I love you, Kane Rutherford, today, tomorrow, always. I love you too, Jane, more than words can ever say." They kissed, a kiss that held 17 years of love and partnership, of struggles overcome and joys shared, of a life built together from nothing but hope and determination. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new changes, new challenges, new blessings. Kieran grew into a fine young man, eventually courting and marrying a girl from a neighboring ranch, bringing a daughter-in-law into the family that Jane loved like her own. Catherine blossomed into a beautiful, intelligent young woman who surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, following in the footsteps of the grandmother she had never met. Kevin inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's stubbornness, a combination that served him well in life. Kane and Jane grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminishing. They saw their children married and settled, welcomed grandchildren with joy, watched their family tree spread and grow. On a spring morning in 1920, 42 years after Jane had first slept in Kane's haystack, they sat together on the porch they had rebuilt twice over the years. Kane was 81 now, Jane 78, both of them slowed by age but still sharp of mind and warm of heart. "Quite a life we built," Kane said, surveying the land that had been his for more than 50 years. The original ranch house had been expanded and improved, new buildings added, the land worked and cared for by 3 generations now. "Quite a life," Jane agreed. "No regrets. Only that it has to end sometime. But even that is bearable, knowing we will go together eventually." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. Together, always together. Their grandchildren visited that afternoon, the porch filling with noise and life, stories and laughter. Jane watched them all with deep satisfaction. These beautiful children and grandchildren who existed because a desperate young woman had found shelter in a haystack, and a lonely cowboy had offered her warmth. That night, lying in bed beside Kane, listening to his steady breathing, Jane thought about the journal she had kept all these years. Page after page filled with stories of their life, the happy moments and the hard ones, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. It was a record of a love that had endured, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose each other every single day. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was talking to Kane or to God or to the universe that had brought them together. Kane's hand found hers under the blankets, his grip still strong despite his age. "Thank you too," he murmured, understanding without needing explanation. They fell asleep that way, hands linked, hearts joined. 2 souls that had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years later, at the age of 86, with Jane beside him holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend, an ache that never fully healed. But she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that continued to thrive, in the memories of a life well lived together. Jane followed him 2 years after that, on a cold January night remarkably similar to the one when she had first arrived in Wyoming. She died in the house Kane had built, surrounded by family, her last words a whisper of his name. They were buried side by side in the Sheridan Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, Kane Rutherford, 1839–1925, and Jane Morrison Rutherford, 1842–1927. Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, together always. But their real legacy was not in the stone, or even in the land they had worked. It was in the family that gathered every year for reunions on the ranch, in the stories passed down through generations, in the example they had set of what love could be when it was built on kindness, respect, and unwavering commitment. The original ranch house still stood more than a century later, lovingly maintained by descendants who understood its significance. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, those who lived there swore they could feel a presence, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. It was the echo of a love that had transformed 2 lonely people into a family, a simple haystack encounter into a legendary romance. the story of the cowboy who found a desperate woman sleeping in his haystack and offered her warmth, shelter, and eventually his heart became part of Sheridan's history, told and retold with affection and admiration. It was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest act of kindness, that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that a life built together, day by day, moment by moment, is the greatest adventure of all. In the end, that cold January night in 1878, when Kane Rutherford opened his barn door and said, "Barn's warmer, come inside," to a stranger named Jane Morrison, changed not just two lives, but created a legacy that would endure for generations. It proved that the wild frontier was not just a place of danger and hardship, but also a land of possibility where two people could find each other against all odds and build something beautiful, lasting, and true. Their love story, born in a Wyoming haystack and nurtured through decades of partnership, remained a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and the choice to love completely and without reservation. It was, in every sense, a life well lived and a love well earned, the kind of story that made people believe in second chances, in fate, and in the transformative power of opening your heart to another soul. And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single step into the unknown, and the greatest loves start with a simple invitation. Come inside, where it is warm, where you are safe, where you belong.